Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with award-winning Canadian composer, musician, performer, conductor, and educator Don Macdonald. He opened up about his new 2021 CD called Shifting Sands. He is an internationally recognized composer of film and concert music that has been playing improvised music for over 35 years on violin, saxophone, and voice with a wide range of artists. We cover some good ground here in our talk. Enjoy the story.
Well, it's great to catch up with you. Thanks for taking a minute to talk with Neon Jazz. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about Shifting Sands. You know, along with everything else, with as you talked about flooding and everything else going on, we're still dealing with COVID. And you have an album coming out during this time. What does it mean to have an album come out where you have the chance to possibly perform live and to really promote this in a different way than maybe 6 to 8 months ago?
Yeah, well, we're just on the cusp of this amazing breakthrough of out of this hibernation we've all been in for so long. As artists, we've just been starved for audiences, and I think it's going to be, I'm hoping it's just a huge celebration of artistry on all levels that audiences come out and celebrate. I really think that this upcoming summer is going to be just tremendous. I'm really optimistic.
So from a creative standpoint, what are you hoping to convey with this album? What do you want the listener to get that buys or downloads it? Yeah,
I took my inspiration from a couple of different things. For me, I was a classically trained violinist, but when I was in university, I stopped playing. I had some friends at a party, and I got dogpiled, and my wrist kind of got bent out of shape, and I started playing saxophone. As a result, I spent a ton of time in the library just listening to music because I couldn't play for a while, and I was kind of getting a bit more into jazz at the time. And I was inspired by this album I heard by this guy named Daryl Anger. It's an album called Fiddlesticks, and at the time it had Tony Rice on it and Dave Grisman. And so this is kind of a tribute to some fiddle players that I've followed for a long time, as well as my own love of different jazz composers like John Zorn, Robert Glasper recently, and Chris Thiele as well. So it's kind of a celebration both of composition and some mentors of mine, fiddle players. You,
as you mentioned, you were classically trained on violin. How did you get the bug to not only get into music, but later on, how did jazz get on your radar?
As I was saying, I got this injury when I was in university, switched over to saxophone. As a classical player, I always felt like when I was playing in the orchestra, I had trouble just keeping with the notes that were on the page. I know that all these composers were fantastic improvisers, and for me, the struggle was playing that music and knowing that if I didn't play it exactly how the conductor wanted it, it was not going to work. And I realized that these symphony orchestras are not about democracy, and it's rule of law as brought down by the composer for sure and the conductor. But for me, I strove to kind of break out of that, and through my own writing and improvisation, just kind of find a new place for myself as a writer and a performer.
So talk to me a little bit about your inspirations for jazz. Who really inspired you?
Yeah, well, early on it was saxophone players like Paul Desmond, Joe Lovano. I love guitar players like Schofield, and I love the arrangements of people like Vince Mendoza. There's a fantastic album with John Schofield and Metropole Orchestra, which is just fantastic. And I kind of like that place that compositions can go where, in a jazz tune, we get the head of the tune and we get some improvisation, but then you take us on a little bit of a voyage. And that's kind of what this album is striving to do, is have little sparks of creativity thrown in with the soloing and stuff like that. And I mentioned John Zorn a little while ago, and that album, I think it's called Le Grand Guignol, is a crazy album. And this is nothing like that, but I did enjoy that kind of sense that you didn't know what was going to happen next. For me, that's the spice in music, is finding those little corners that people where something is kind of lit all of a sudden and is unexpected.
Talk to me a little bit about the very first jazz show you ever saw. What was that like, and how did that motivate and influence the way that you wanted to pursue your career?
Trying to remember what the first one was. It might have been Marcus Roberts, actually, in Vancouver many years ago. Just watching this guy on stride piano was unbelievable. And I saw a couple of shows with Mike Stern as well in my early days. I went to university on Vancouver Island here next to Vancouver. Mike Stern would come to town sometimes, so would Pat Metheny. And so those concerts early on were hugely influential for me. I think Pat Metheny was just a crazy touring guy in those days. I think in that van that they had, and so he was up to Victoria, which is where I was pretty much every year, sometimes once or twice a year.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. I moved to the hometown of Pat Metheny right before the world shut down in January 2020, and it's almost like when you buy a car, you recognize it all the time. And I don't know if it's just his influence is that big. Everybody I talk to, I always hear a Pat Metheny story. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's for sure. It was, I think it was Off Ramp was played nonstop in this apartment where I was for a year, and then, and I loved what he did with the vocals too. You know, that was really original at the time, and I don't think anybody's done anything quite the same since. And then speaking of some other influences too, I did a couple of years ago. I went to this workshop out back east, and they had it was in New York with a guy named Christian Howes, and they brought up this other fiddle player from Texas, I believe. It was a guy named Billy Contreras. This guy is just a maniac on violin, unbelievably talented, and kind of ushered in this new generation of jazz violin players, and it's really kind of turned fiddle playing on its head, this idea that we don't all have to grow up playing the notes on the page, and that from a really early age that people can be exploring and just playing with that notion that we're all born composers, we're all born to play in our musical sandboxes. And so yeah, a couple people like that, Billy Contreras, Christian Howes, and this guy that plays on this album of mine actually plays mandolin on it, is Jason Anik, really talented guy from Boston, teaches at Berkeley.
You know, you've composed for, film and for different media. What is it like? How does that make you, does it help you grow more to actually compose something that's going to be visually taken in as well?
Yeah, for sure. You know, it does, because with film, of course, you're not there. It's not about you. It's about serving the story. It forces you to go to uncomfortable places. Often I did a short film that won the Cannes Film Festival many years ago. It was just the biggest puzzle to compose for this film. And what we found at the end was that sort of 19th century opera was the key to it. So, and something I'd never envisioned writing, but it was 10 minutes. It was a short, 10-minute film, and so we wrote opera for it. And then the next time out, I did a zombie movie where we're writing in the style of Bernard Herrmann from the 1950s. So that's fun, that's a ton of fun to be pushed into those awkward places. But at the end of the day, for me, film music became a little frustrating because it was never about my music, and the music often. Sometimes your best music ends up on the cutting room floor because it's not necessarily serving the vision of the director. And then there's, of course, these moments, too, where you maybe not, you don't think that the vision of the director is the right vision for the film. And so I sort of jumped ship from that. And I've been enjoying just writing. I did a pop album a little while ago, and I write a lot of choral music as well. So it's selfishly music for myself, but it's been great because I've had some fabulous collaborators, like on this album, Dave Restivo, Mike Rudd. These are some Canadian guys that are just fantastic that I teach with. It's been nice to kind of showcase their playing on this album too.
You've mentioned a lot of players and a lot of films and different avenues that you've been down in your career, and you've obviously been around a lot of big names and veterans. What have you learned and accumulated over time that you in turn have used to be an effective educator, to give back to your students?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess I try to go into every situation with as open a mind as possible. That I'm gonna try and learn something every day. And one of the things I tell my students sometimes when they enter the school is that we're all standing on the edge of this vast ocean. I can't see the horizon. For me, that's what music is like I'm still dipping my toe in. I started doing a little bit of research into tabla recently, and took a lesson and realized quickly that this is not an instrument you dabble in, and that there was an ocean of information and an ocean of learning that was necessary to get into that instrument. And it's so true of absolutely every instrument and every style, is that it's so enormous that I'm kind of humbled by music in that way. I just love it. There's just so many directions to go.
So if you could get into a time machine or a jazz DeLorean and go back in time and see anybody live, who would you love to see?
I think I talked about Paul Desmond a little while ago. I absolutely love his sound, and I love the crafting of melody that is part of that sound as well. To me, there's almost you could draw a connection from that type of playing right down to the solo Bach cello suites and stuff. It's got unbelievable groove, but it's the cleanest, most beautiful playing to me. So hanging out with those guys and watching that would be definitely my choice.
Well, I don't know if you've heard this story about Paul, but towards the end of his life, he had to decide where all the proceeds for Take 5 would go. He was in charge of that, and he picked the Red Cross, not thinking that his time was short. So all of the proceeds for all these years have gone to the Red Cross.
Oh man, wow, that's incredible.
Wild.
That's probably a pile of money by now.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the good keeps spreading out there. If you have a dream tonight and you run into your younger version of yourself and you could give that younger version advice, and this isn't about regret, it's about the wisdom you've accumulated over all these years, what would you tell your younger self?
Wow, that's a good one. That's probably something that would change every month. The thought at this point in time, I've been a multi-instrumentalist all my life. I started off as a singer, and then went to violin. I've always dabbled on piano and saxophone. The thing that I'm appreciating now is those people who have that single-minded focus. It's funny. I play squash. There's this coach that was in town recently, and he said that when he was a kid, he used to put a squash ball beside his night table, so that when he went to sleep at night, he'd stare at it, and it would be the first thing he woke up in the morning. And that's kind of the antithesis of what I would do. I would just be doing everything, and in that focus, I think those people get to a really, really special place. So if I could go back, that's probably what I would choose to do. It might change in a month from now. That might have a completely different take on it. But many of the players that I'm looking at right now, and some of the composers too, this focus and this knowledge of their craft in such a singular way that they are able to grow. And Healy's another example. Somebody who's just an absolute genius, then some special stuff happens for sure. I've definitely put in my 10,000 hours as a composer, probably in film music alone. But anyway, that's my take on it for this month.
Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, your students, but ultimately you live your life. You have a perception of who you are. Who do you think you are?
That's a good one. You know what? I think I'm a musician that just loves to explore. That exploration can get me into trouble sometimes, in that I go to places maybe that I shouldn't, and but that exploration always, I think, is taking me to places that are interesting for listeners. And if it's maybe not every song on an album, or every album that I put out, or every piece that I write, know that you're going to find little gems of things that hopefully make it to your deserted island recording at some point. I think of some of the albums of people like Joni Mitchell, Miles Davis too. It's not every album that I love of theirs, but man, did they push the envelope at times. And in pushing the envelope, you're rubbing up and you're pushing up against places you maybe shouldn't go, but in that push, you're sure finding some places that are exciting.
I like that answer. Hey, Don, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today. Good luck as we move forward. I appreciate it.
I so appreciate it, Joe. Thanks, then.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players and composers in Canada, America, and spots all over the globe, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Don for his time and cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.